One day, Mr. George Hill, president of the American Tobacco Company, whose whole life was consecrated to the idea of making Lucky Strikes the first and foremost cigarette in the United States, called me in and said, "I wonder whether you can help us. What can you do? Women are not smoking as many cigarettes as I think of our cigarettes as I think they should, because they state that green clashes with the fashionable colors of that particular period." So I said to Mr. Hill, "Why don't you change the color of the package?" And he said to me, "I'm spending $65 million a year to popularize green." So I was rather young at that time, and I said, "Well, then let's change the color of the fashion." He said, "What'll it cost?" I didn't know what it would cost, but I thought of the largest figure I could think of at the time, which today would be about $500,000, and which then was $25,000. So I said, $25,000. He said, "Spend it." Well, I wondered how to go about spending it, and I made a research, which I always did before I actually started to make recommendations. And we'd been working with the haute couture in France, and in France they have a bal de l'opéra, a ball of the opera, at which they introduce their new fashions every year, and Harper's Bazaar and Vogue and magazines of fashion from all over the world sent their editors to this bal de l'opéra, and that became the fashion of the world. So it occurred to me that a green ball would bring about the end result. And at that time, the most important women's hospital in New York was the Infirmary for Women, and Mrs. Frank Vanderlip, who was the wife of a very important officer of the Citibank, National City Bank, one of the largest banks in the country, was president of the Women's Infirmary. I told her my story about Lucky Strikes, and I said, "How would you like to make green popular? We have $25,000 to spend, and I'll be glad to give it to you, and you can do what you want with it, such as hiring the main ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, sending people over to Europe to get the colors of the Impressionists, which were green, and bringing a portrait over to the United States and having society women pose in that pose, the same picture as was in the painting, in green costumes." And she said, "Yes, I'd be glad to go ahead," knowing all of the facts. And they sent out a lot of society column notices about the green ball at the Waldorf in October. Then I recalled that women at that time, following the French fashion, wore what were called parures. If they wore green, they'd have to wear green stockings. There were no pantyhose at that time. Green shoes, green shawls, green gloves. So I called a meeting at the Sherry Netherlands where we lived of all the heads of associations, and I said to them, "Gentlemen, green is going to be the color of fashion in the fall." And they all said, "Well, we know that from the society columns because we know that'll have a great effect. And overnight, and at the meeting, they all said, of course, we'll follow green. And they did. And in September, before the ball was held in October, I went to a newsstand to get a paper, and there I noticed on the newsstand a copy of Harper's Bazaar and Vogue with women in green on the cover. And I recognized that I didn't have to do any work anymore because the plans for the Green Ball had helped to create the fashion, and indeed was for a number of years until, unfortunately, green had to go to war because the green dyes came from Germany and they could no longer get them to make the green package. But between the ball and that time, green became a fashionable color.